She walked into the lobby expecting a simple meeting, but within seconds, everything changed. A cup of soda crashed over her head, dripping down her clothes as the staff burst into laughter, mocking her like she didn't even deserve to stand on that floor. Phones were raised, whispers spread, and as she stood there shaking, one thought echoed through the room: she doesn't belong here. What none of them knew was that the person who did belong here would walk in just minutes later, and his next words would shatter their entire world. Comment and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories. Before the chaos in that lobby, her morning looked like any other. Maya Anderson had woken up early, reviewing notes for a quiet lunch meeting she planned as a surprise. Something simple, something personal, something meant to brighten her husband's long week. She dressed with intention, not for attention, choosing the kind of polished look she wore to every professional event. Nothing about her presence carried a hint of disruption. She moved through the world with a steady, quiet confidence built through years of navigating spaces that didn't always welcome her. The city felt calm as she arrived at the building, a place she'd visited many times before, yet rarely without her husband beside her. Today felt different, purposeful, even hopeful. She knew the lobby staff changed often, but she'd never imagined those unfamiliar faces would soon define one of the most humiliating moments of her life. Stepping inside, she walked with the ease of someone who belonged, unaware of the tension building beneath the surface. She didn't look like the type they expected to see walking through those glass doors, and that unspoken judgment was already tightening around her, even before the first word was said or the first laugh was exchanged. There was no sign, no warning, that she was seconds away from becoming the center of a spectacle she never asked for. As she approached the reception desk, she felt only a mild curiosity about the new employees and the usual morning bustle of the lobby. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing seemed dangerous, but the smallest assumptions can spark the biggest storms. And in that room, a quiet prejudice was already turning into a plan, one that would strip away her composure, test her dignity, and expose the ugliest truth hidden behind a polished corporate facade. She had no idea how quickly her morning was about to break apart. The moment Maya reached the reception desk, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a tightening of posture, a shared glance, a smirk that flickered too quickly to call out. She introduced herself calmly, expecting a standard check-in, but the staff's reaction wasn't professional curiosity. It was disbelief, followed by something far colder. Without warning, one of them lifted a cup as if pointing out a spill, then tipped it forward. The liquid crashed down her head, soaking through her coat, seeping into the fabric beneath, dripping across the marble floor. The room erupted, not in shock but in laughter. High-pitched, careless, cruel. The kind of laughter that doesn't come from humor but from power. For a moment, Maya couldn't move. Not because of the cold drink, but because of the eyes fixed on her, studying her as if her humiliation was entertainment. The employees passing through the lobby slowed, not to help but to stare. Phones lifted. Whispers spread. A few shook their heads, not out of sympathy but amusement, as if they had stumbled onto a show they didn't want to miss. Maya stood there trembling, coat ruined, heart pounding against her ribs. She asked for assistance, simple, reasonable, human, but every request was met with resistance. They dismissed her presence, questioned her purpose, hinted she didn't fit here. Their tone sharpened with each refusal, twisting her discomfort into their narrative of her being the problem. Around her, the crowd grew, 10 people, then 15. Expressions ranged from entertained to indifferent, all anchored in the belief that she didn't deserve help. A few employees paused with hesitation, sensing something wrong, but none of them wanted to be the one to intervene. Silence became their shield, compliance their comfort. Security was eventually called, not for the staff's actions, but for her composure fracturing under the weight of humiliation. They framed her as disruptive, uncooperative, even threatening, despite her calm attempts to explain what happened. Their version spread faster than the truth. The more she tried to maintain dignity, the more the crowd distorted her presence into a spectacle. One security guard looked at her with a flicker of uncertainty, recognizing something inconsistent in the explanation he was given. Yet doubt wasn't enough to oppose the authority surrounding him. Another guard stepped in with rigid certainty, reinforcing the assumption that Maya was the intruder, not the injured party. Their stance made her feel smaller, backed into a corner she didn't walk into. As the minutes ticked by, the pressure intensified. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into judgment, judgment into a shared agreement that she should leave quickly, quietly, and without protest. The shame wasn't just in the soda dripping from her hair or the cold seeping through her clothes. It was in the crowd's willingness to accept the lie forming around her. It was in the realization that she was standing in a place where truth didn't matter as much as perception. Every exit felt blocked, not physically but emotionally. Leaving meant surrendering to the narrative they were crafting. Staying meant enduring the weight of their eyes, their smirks, their assumptions. She didn't know which choice hurt more. Then a spark of tension rippled through the lobby. A call came through a security radio. A vehicle had just pulled into the executive lot, one that didn't usually arrive this early. The room shifted. Curiosity replaced laughter. Phones lowered, faces turned toward the entrance. Maya felt something stir inside her, not relief, not yet, but the faintest edge of hope. The kind of hope that comes when the truth is only moments away from stepping into the room. Still soaked, still trembling, still surrounded, she held her ground. Because the person who could end this wasn't upstairs, he was walking through the front door. The lobby seemed to freeze the moment the glass doors opened. Footsteps crossed the threshold, steady, confident, unmistakable. The crowd's expressions shifted from amusement to confusion, then to something far more uneasy as recognition settled in. The man stepping inside wasn't just another executive arriving for work. He was the one person in the entire building whose authority overshadowed every voice that had mocked, doubted, or dismissed her. As he moved through the lobby, the laughter evaporated. Phones lowered, postures straightened. The energy in the room compressed into a single, silent realization. Someone important had just walked into the aftermath of something deeply wrong. He saw her instantly, not as the crowd saw her, not as a disruption, but as someone he knew intimately. Her soaked clothes, her trembling hands, the humiliation she had been forced to stand in alone. Something inside him shifted, a sharp, cold understanding of what had unfolded in a place that existed under his leadership. Eyes that usually carried calm authority now held something far heavier. Around them, the crowd braced. Some tried to blend into the walls, others froze mid-step, and a few looked away entirely, hoping distance might erase their participation. The guards who had been preparing to escort her out stiffened, unsure whether to speak or silence themselves. The reception staff, so bold moments earlier, now seemed impossibly small behind the desk. He approached her with a steadiness that cut through the room. The shift in his demeanor spread like a shockwave. The staff who minutes earlier dictated who belonged in the building suddenly felt the weight of their own assumptions. Every smirk, every accusation, every careless laugh replayed in their minds with brutal clarity. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't an awkward moment or a misjudgment. This was a public unraveling of their prejudice, exposed in the presence of the one person whose judgment they could not escape. The truth hung unspoken but unmistakable. She did belong here, more than any of them realized. And in that instant, the entire room understood the consequences were no longer hypothetical. The tension tightened as he turned toward the watching crowd. His expression carried no raised voice, no outburst, only a chilling resolve that held far more weight than anger ever could. The silence sharpened, pressing against every person who had contributed to her humiliation, whether through mockery, complacency, or quiet complicity. The employees who had laughed now felt the floor shift beneath them, their confidence dissolving into dread. The ones who had stayed silent felt the sting of their inaction, and those who had helped escalate the situation braced for consequences they could no longer outrun. Yet through it all, Maya remained standing, soaked, shaken, but unbroken. And as the room faced the man now stepping into the center of the crisis, one thing became clear. The moment of judgment had arrived. What he chose to do next would determine everything that followed. When the truth finally settled over the lobby, the room felt different, quieter, heavier, stripped of the arrogance that had filled it only minutes before. The man who stepped forward didn't raise his voice or demand explanations. He didn't need to. His presence alone unraveled every lie, every excuse, every attempt to twist the blame onto her. And as the reality of what they had done echoed back at them, the staff who once laughed now stood trembling under the weight of their own actions. What followed wasn't just disciplinary action or corporate consequences. It was a reckoning. Each person who played a part in her humiliation was forced to see themselves clearly, without the comfort of excuses, without the shield of collective cruelty. The ones who laughed felt the sting of their mockery. The ones who stayed silent faced the ache of their inaction. And those who fueled the humiliation confronted a truth far uglier than the moment itself. But for Maya Anderson, this day became more than a moment of pain. It became a turning point. not because someone powerful stood beside her, but because she refused to fold under the weight of their prejudice. She stayed firm in a room built to push her out. She stood her ground when the world around her tried to strip away her dignity, and her strength became the catalyst for something far bigger than the people who tried to diminish her. The incident sparked change within the company, policies rewritten, training overhauled, accountability enforced. Yet the deeper impact stretched beyond the building's walls. Because her story wasn't just about one lobby, one morning, or one act of cruelty. It was a reflection of countless moments endured by countless people whose stories are never recorded, never acknowledged, never vindicated. Her experience became a reminder, a mirror held up to a society where racism often hides behind polite smiles, workplace titles, and silent bystanders. And that leaves us with one question. When injustice unfolds in front of you, will you be the one who laughs, the one who looks away, or the one who finally decides to speak? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and our community's fight to be seen.